The air inside the hut is not air at all. It is a living, breathing soup of dried things, a suspension of dust and memory that settles in the back of the throat with the taste of ancient summers. It is a thick, motionless atmosphere, heavy with the scent of valerian root, which smells of the damp earth and old leather, and the sharp medicinal tang of dried yarrow. I sit in my heavy oak chair, the wood polished to a dull sheen by decades of my own presence, and I watch the way the light from the single narrow window begins its slow, agonizing crawl across the uneven floorboards. The floor is a map of my life, a collection of knots and grooves worn down by the constant treading of feet seeking relief. There is no urgency here. The world outside may be governed by the frantic cycles of kings and wars, but within these walls, time is measured by the drying of a leaf and the cooling of a hearth. My hands, stained permanently a deep, earthy brown by the juices of 1,000 crushed stems, rest on the table. They are steady, though the skin is as papery as the birch bark I use for labels. I find myself staring at a bunch of dried mugwort hanging from the central beam. It sways ever so slightly, caught in a draft that I cannot feel. Its silver-gray leaves ghost-like in the dimming light. It has been hanging there for 3 weeks, and tomorrow it will be dry enough to crumble. This is the pace of my world. There is no rushing the cure. There is only the waiting. The fire in the hearth is a low, pulsing orange glow, more heat than light, eating slowly into a log of seasoned ash. Ash burns clean, they say, and it leaves a fine white powder that I sometimes mix into my poultices. I listen to it. It doesn't crackle like pine, it sighs. It is a long, drawn-out exhalation that fills the room, a rhythmic sound that matches the slow thrum of the forest outside. I think about the marshmallow roots I harvested yesterday. They are laid out on a linen cloth near the warmth of the fire, sliced thin so the moisture can escape. They are pale, almost white, and they feel like velvet between the fingers. I spent 4 hours by the riverbank, kneeling in the soft mud, my knees damp and cold, just to find the right specimens. The mud there is thick and smells of rotted reeds and cold water, a scent that stays in your nostrils long after you've washed. It was a gray morning, the kind where the mist clings to the water's surface like a wet shroud, and the only sound was the occasional plop of a water rat or the distant, lonely call of a heron. There is a deep, repetitive comfort in the digging. You thrust the small iron spade into the earth. You feel the resistance of the roots, the suction of the wet soil, and then the release. Again and again, my back ached, a dull, familiar throb that reminded me I am as much a part of this earth as the plants I seek. I carried them back in my wicker basket, the weight of the damp roots pulling at my shoulder, a grounding pressure that made me feel solid and real. Now they sit and wait. They are transitioning from living things into medicine, a slow, silent alchemy that requires nothing from me but my patience. I pick up a single slice of the root. It is already beginning to curl at the edges, the moisture retreating. I rub it between my thumb and forefinger, feeling the slight tackiness of the mucilage. This will be for the winter coughs, for the children whose chests rattle like dry seeds in a pod. But that is months away. For now there is only the silence of the room and the slow turning of the shadows. The shelves that line the walls are groaning under the weight of glass jars, ceramic pots, and tightly tied bundles of herbs. I know the location of every single item by touch alone. My fingers could find the dried peppermint in the dark, the crinkled leaves feeling like tiny shards of parchment. I could find the stinging nettle seeds, rough and gritty, or the chamomile flowers, soft and crumbly like old cake. I spend hours organizing them, not because they are in disarray, but because the act of touching them is a form of prayer. I take a jar of dried rose hips from the third shelf. They are hard, like little pebbles, and their deep red color has faded into a dark, rusty crimson. I pour a few into my palm and let them roll around. The sound they make is a dry, clicking noise, like the teeth of a tiny animal. I think of the hedge where I found them, a tangled mess of thorns and wild vines that caught at my sleeves and scratched my forearms. It was a hot afternoon in late August, the air thick with the buzzing of heavy, golden-furred bees and the smell of sun-baked dust. The thorns were sharp and unforgiving, but the hips were plump and full of the sun's heat. Now they are cold and silent in my hand. I will grind them later, using the heavy stone mortar and pestle. The rhythm of the grinding is a song in itself, a low, rhythmic grind and thump that vibrates through the table and into my bones. It is a slow process. You cannot rush the stone. You must let the weight of the pestle do the work, turning the hard shells into a fine, ruby-colored powder. Outside, the evening is settling over the forest. The light is turning a deep, bruised purple, and the trees are becoming solid walls of black. I do not light a candle yet. I prefer the gloom, the way it softens the edges of the jars and makes the bundles of herbs look like sleeping birds. The air is cooling, and a dampness is beginning to creep in through the cracks in the door. I move to the hearth and add a handful of dried peat to the fire. It catches slowly, giving off a thick, earthy smoke that smells of the moors and the deep, dark places where the sun never reaches. I sit back down, the wood of my chair creaking in a slow, rhythmic protest. My life is a collection of these small, insignificant sounds: the rustle of a dry leaf, the sigh of the fire, the distant hoot of an owl. There is no grand narrative here, no sudden revelations. There is only the cycle of the seasons, the growing and the dying, and the slow, steady work of my hands. I find myself thinking about the wild garlic that will bloom in the spring. It is months away, yet I can almost smell it. That pungent, green scent that cuts through the stagnant air of the woods. It is a sharp, vibrant memory that contrasts with the heavy, dusty reality of my hut. But spring is a dream. Winter is the truth. Winter is the time of long shadows and the slow consumption of stored things. I reach for my pestle, its stone surface cool and reassuring. I have a batch of dried comfrey to prepare. The leaves are large and hairy, even in their dried state, and they feel like the tongue of a cat against my skin. I break them into smaller pieces, the sound a series of tiny, dry snaps that punctuate the silence of the room. Each snap is a small death, a release of the last bit of life held within the cell walls. I place them in the mortar and begin the circular motion of the grind. Round and round, the stone groaning against the stone. My shoulder moves in a slow, practiced arc. My breathing slows down to match the rhythm. I am not thinking about the people who will use this comfrey, the farmers with bruised shins or the weavers with aching wrists. I am thinking only of the resistance of the leaves, the way they resist being turned into dust, and the way the stone eventually wins. It is a slow, inevitable victory. The powder begins to accumulate in the bottom of the bowl, a dull, greenish-gray dust that smells faintly of the sun. I stop for a moment to wipe the sweat from my brow, my hand leaving a smudge of green dust on my skin. I am becoming the medicine. I am becoming the dust. The room is almost entirely dark now, save for the pulsing eye of the hearth. The shadows have stretched across the floor and climbed the walls, swallowing the jars and the bundles of herbs until everything is a uniform velvety black. I do not mind. I know where everything is. I know the silence of the jars and the patience of the roots. I am content to sit here in the dark, a small, breathing part of the forest's long, slow exhaling. My work is not done, but it is never done. It merely pauses. Tomorrow the light will return, and I will find the mugwort ready to crumble. I will find the marshmallow roots a little drier. I will continue the slow, silent work of being. I lean my head back against the high wooden back of the chair and close my eyes. The darkness behind my eyelids is no different from the darkness in the room. I can feel the vibration of the earth beneath the floorboards, a low tectonic hum that most people have forgotten how to hear. It is the sound of the deep roots drinking, of the stones settling, of the world turning on its axis. It is a heavy, grounding sound that pulls at my consciousness, inviting me to sink deeper into the chair, deeper into the night. I am like a seed buried in the frost, waiting without expectation. The smell of the dried herbs is my atmosphere, a protective layer of scent that keeps the outside world at bay. I am safe here. I am quiet here. I am the herbalist, the keeper of the slow things, the witness to the long, gray hours. The fire gives one last, soft pop, a tiny spark flying out and dying on the stone hearth. The silence rushes in to fill the gap, thicker and heavier than before. It is a silence that has been building for centuries, a silence that knows my name. I let my hands fall still. I let my breath become a part of the room's exhalation. I am drifting now, floating on a sea of dried lavender and crushed roots, moving slowly, so slowly, toward the dreamless dark. The darkness in the hut has now achieved a state of absolute density, a velvet thickness that seems to muffle the very passage of time. I do not reach for the flint or the steel to strike a light. There is no need to disturb the shadows. Instead, I transition from the chair to the long workbench, my feet knowing the exact distance, avoiding the slightly warped floorboard near the grain bin. My task now is the decanting of the tinctures, a process that requires a stillness of spirit that only the middle of the night can provide. I reach for a heavy glass flagon, its surface cool and slightly tacky with a residue of honey and wax. Inside, the spirits have been steeping with the shredded bark of the white willow for 40 days. I lift it, feeling the slow, heavy slosh of the liquid within, a dark and secret movement that mimics the flow of sap in the deep winter. I begin to pour it through a fine linen sieve into smaller ceramic vials. The sound is a delicate, rhythmic glug, 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 a liquid music that fills the small space. The scent of the sharp alcohol hits the air first, stinging the nostrils, followed quickly by the bitter, woody undertone of the bark. It is a clean smell, a sharp contrast to the dusty sweetness of the dried herbs. I move with a slow, deliberate precision, watching the dark liquid fill the vials to the neck. If I spill a single drop, the scent will linger on the wood for weeks, a ghost of a remedy. There is a profound, quiet satisfaction in the repetition. Tilt, pour, settle, cork. Tilt, pour, settle, cork. My mind becomes a void, occupied only by the weight of the glass and the rising level of the fluid. The willow bark was gathered in the early spring, when the trees were still shivering in the thaw. I remember the feel of the knife slicing through the tender outer layer, the sound of the bark stripping away, a long, fibrous zip that echoed across the frozen marsh. The sap was just beginning to stir, a cold, bitter lifeblood that tasted of copper and rain. Now that life is trapped in these small jars, concentrated and patient. I press the corks into the vials using the heel of my hand, a firm, dull thud for each one. One for the miller's wife, whose joints ache when the wind turns north. One for the old woodcutter, whose back is a map of knots and scars. These are not cures that work with the speed of a lightning strike. They are slow mercies, gradual adjustments to the rhythm of a body that has been worn down by the world. I label them not with ink, for ink is expensive and rare, but by the shape of the jar and the specific way I have tied the hempen twine around the neck. A double knot for the willow, a single loop for the valerian. In the dark, my fingers are my eyes, reading the textures of the twine like a secret language. I move to the corner where the large earthenware crocks are kept, the ones filled with infused oils. I lift the heavy wooden lid of the St. John's wort oil, and even in the gloom, I can sense the deep, blood-red hue of the liquid. It was infused during the height of the summer solstice, when the sun was a golden hammer and the flowers were so full of oil they felt greasy to the touch. I spent the whole day in the high meadow, the heat radiating off the yellow blossoms, the air humming with the frantic energy of grasshoppers. Now that summer heat is trapped in the oil, a liquid sun that will be rubbed into bruised skin when the frost is an inch thick on the windows. I dip a wooden ladle into the crock, the oil coating the wood in a thick, shimmering film. I transfer it to smaller pots, the sound a soft thwip, thwip, as the viscous liquid breaks the surface. The smell is heavy and floral, yet with a base of cold olive oil, a scent that speaks of distant lands and long journeys. My movements are slower now, the lethargy of the night finally beginning to seep into my joints. I find myself leaning against the workbench, the cold stone of the mortar pressing against my hip, listening to the silence. The silence of a medieval hut is never truly empty. It is filled with the microscopic sounds of decay and preservation. I can hear the wood-boring beetles in the rafters, a tiny, rhythmic tick, tick, tick as they carve their tunnels through the oak. I can hear the settling of the thatch on the roof, the dried reeds shifting as the humidity of the night increases. It is a living, breathing house, a shell that protects me from the vast, indifferent forest. I think of the forest now, extending for miles in every direction, a sea of dark timber and hidden paths. Out there, the wolves are moving in silence, their paws treading on the same moss I gathered last week. The owls are watching from the hollows of the ancient yews, their hearts beating in a slow, predatory rhythm. The forest doesn't care about my tinctures or my herbs. It simply is, and there is a comfort in that indifference. It makes my small life feel stable, a tiny, flickering hearth in an infinite night. I take a small cup of cold water from the bucket by the door. The water is flat and metallic, tasting of the deep well and the iron of the pail. It washes away the bitterness of the willow bark from my tongue. I sit back down in my chair, the wood welcoming me like an old friend. The fire has gone out completely now, leaving only a faint ashen warmth in the air. I can feel the coldness of the floor rising through the soles of my boots, a creeping chill that reminds me I am still tethered to the physical world. I reach for a bundle of dried lavender that I keep on the table, not to process it, but simply to hold it. I rub the small purple buds between my palms, releasing a faint, dusty cloud of perfume. Lavender is the scent of the end of things, the smell of clean linen and final rest. It smooths the jagged edges of my thoughts, turning the worries of the day, the low grain stores, the leaking thatch, the encroaching winter, into soft, blurred shapes that no longer have the power to prick. I find myself thinking about the rhythm of the year, the way it breathes in and out. The spring is an inhalation, a frantic drawing in of life and greenness. The autumn is the exhalation, a slow release, a settling into the earth. I am in the pause at the end of the breath. I am the moment of stillness before the cycle begins again. My hands are quiet now, resting in my lap. The vials are filled, the jars are corked, and the herbs are hanging in their appointed places. The work is done for this night, and yet the work is never finished. It is a continuous thread, a long, unbroken line that stretches back to the first person who ever realized that a certain leaf could stop a bleed, or a certain root could bring sleep. I am merely the current keeper of the thread. I feel a deep, heavy sleepiness beginning to cloud my mind, a gray fog that rolls in from the edges of my vision. It is a natural sleep, unforced and honest, the result of a day spent in the service of the earth. I don't resist it. I let my chin drop to my chest, the scent of lavender and earth filling my lungs. The hut, the forest, the tinctures, and the stone mortar all fade into a single distant hum. I am a seed in the dark. I am the sap in the bark. I am the silence between the ticks of the beetle. I am drifting, falling softly into the deep, cool well of the night, where there is no light, no sound, only the infinite healing dark. The pre-dawn hour is the time of the thinning, that strange, translucent bridge where the physical world hasn't quite regained its weight and the realm of sleep refuses to fully depart. I wake not because of a sound, but because of a shift in the air's temperature, a sharp, crystalline needle of cold that has found its way through the thatch and settled upon the tip of my nose. I do not move. To move would be to break the fragile glass of the morning's stillness. I lie there, my body a heavy, inanimate object beneath the layers of wool and sheepskin, and I listen to the forest beginning to breathe. It is a different breath than the one it took at midnight. It is shallower, expectant, a slow tensing of the earth's muscles. Far off, beyond the creek, a fox bark, a dry, hacking sound that punctures the silence like a needle through silk. Then the silence rushes back in, even deeper than before, a heavy blanket of gray frost that has muted the world. I can feel the frost on the outside of my door, a white, fern-like growth of ice that is currently claiming the wood, turning the iron latch into a thing of stinging cold. Inside, the hut is a cavern of muted shadows. The jars on my shelves are no longer distinct. They are a singular dark mass of stored potential, waiting for the first gray light to give them back their names. I eventually sit up, the movement slow and agonizingly deliberate. The straw of my mattress groans, a long, dry rasp that seems loud enough to wake the trees themselves. My joints crack, a series of small, sharp reports that echo in the emptiness of the room. I find my boots by touch, the leather stiff and unyielding from the overnight chill. Putting them on is a ritual of endurance, my cold fingers fumbling with the laces, the skin of my hands feeling like parchment that might tear if I pull too hard. This is the truth of the herbalist's life. It is not all sun-drenched meadows and fragrant blossoms. It is the cold, the damp, and the relentless ache of a body that is slowly being reclaimed by the element it tends. I stand and move toward the hearth, my footsteps muffled by the layer of dust and dried stems that carpet the floor. I find the iron pot, cold and heavy, and I carry it to the door. When I lift the latch, the sound is a sharp, metallic clack that vibrates through my arm. I push the door open, and the morning air hits me like a physical blow, a wave of pure, scentless cold that smells of nothing but ice and ancient stone. The world outside is a study in charcoal and silver. The trees are skeletons, their branches dripping with a heavy gray mist that refuses to lift. There is no sun yet, only a slight thinning of the darkness in the east, a pale, sickly yellow line that looks like a bruise on the horizon. I walk to the well, my boots crunching through the rime-covered grass. Every blade of grass is a tiny frozen sculpture, stiff and brittle. The air I exhale is a thick white plume that lingers in the still air, a ghostly trail of my own life force. I lower the bucket into the dark circle of the well. The water far below is a black mirror, undisturbed and secret. When the bucket hits the surface, the sound is a hollow, echoing gulp that seems to travel down to the very roots of the mountain. I haul it up, my muscles straining, the hempen rope burning my palms. The water is so cold, it feels like liquid fire when it splashes against my wrists. I fill the iron pot, the water swirling in a dark, icy vortex. This water is the base of everything, the teas, the decoctions, the washes. It is the blood of the earth, drawn from the deep veins of the rock, and it carries the chill of the underworld with it. Back inside, I set the pot upon the crane over the hearth and begin the slow work of reviving the fire. I scrape away the white ash to find the heart, the tiny, glowing ember that has survived the night. I feed it small shavings of birch bark, which catch with a sudden, cheerful hiss and a bright orange flame that smells of winter and sweetness. I add thin twigs of larch, then larger split logs of oak. I sit on my small stool and watch the birth of the day's warmth. The light from the growing fire begins to climb the walls, illuminating the bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters. The dried sage, the peppermint, the mugwort, they begin to cast long, flickering shadows that dance across the ceiling like the ghosts of the plants they once were. I lean forward, my face close to the heat, feeling the skin of my cheeks tighten and glow. The smell of the wood smoke begins to fill the room, a heavy, comforting aroma that signals the start of the labor. I reach for a small wooden bowl of dried hawthorn berries. They are wrinkled and hard, like the hearts of tiny birds. I begin to crush them, not with the mortar and pestle this time, but with a heavy, flat stone I keep for this purpose. The sound is a dull, rhythmic thud, crunch, thud, crunch. Each berry yields with a sharp crack, releasing a faint, mealy scent. These will be simmered for hours to make a syrup for the old men whose hearts have grown tired and slow. It is a patient medicine. It does not hurry, and neither do I. I watch the steam begin to rise from the pot, a thin, white curl of vapor that twists and turns in the draught. The water is beginning to sing, a low, vibrating hum that precedes the boil. This is the music of my morning. The singing of the water, the crackle of the birch bark, and the rhythmic crunch of the berries. It is a symphony of the mundane, a celebration of the small, necessary things. As the light in the window turns from gray to a pale, watery blue, I begin to sort through a pile of roots I dug up before the frost set in. They are caked in dried mud, gnarled and twisted like the fingers of a buried giant. I take a small, blunt knife and begin to scrape them clean. The mud falls away in dry flakes, revealing the pale, cream-colored flesh beneath. These are dandelion roots, bitter and grounding. I will roast them near the edge of the fire until they are dark and fragrant, then grind them into a powder. The smell of roasting roots is one of the great comforts of my life. It is earthy, rich, and deeply nourishing, a scent that speaks of the deep strength hidden beneath the surface of the world. I move with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Scrape, clean, slice. Scrape, clean, slice. My mind drifts back to the dreams I had in the night, fragments of green forests and running water, voices that sounded like the wind in the pines. They are fading now, dissolving in the heat of the fire and the reality of the work. The first bird begins to sing outside, a robin, its voice sharp and clear in the cold air. It is a lonely sound, a single thread of melody in a world of silence. It reminds me that the world is waking up, that soon there will be people at my door with their aches and their fears, their small tragedies and their desperate hopes. But for now, they are still in their beds, and I am alone with my fire and my roots. I am the bridge between the forest and the village, the one who translates the language of the leaves into the language of healing. I pick up a piece of the cleaned root and hold it to the light. It is beautiful in its simplicity, a perfect vessel of life. I feel a deep, quiet peace settle over me, a contentment that has nothing to do with wealth or fame, and everything to do with the weight of the stone in my hand and the warmth of the fire on my knees. The day will be long, the work will be hard, and my back will ache before the sun sets. But the water is boiling now, the roots are clean, and the morning is mine. I am the herbalist, and this is my life. One root, one leaf, one breath at a time. The sun has finally managed to pull itself above the tangled horizon of the forest, but its light is weak and watery, a pale lemon yellow that provides no warmth, only a flat, clinical clarity to the world. Inside the hut, the steam from the iron pot has become a thick, swirling fog that catches the slanting beams of light, making them look like solid pillars of white dust. My hands are now stained a dark, indelible ochre from the dandelion roots, the juice having settled into the deep lines of my palms like a map of the earth itself. I do not wash them. The skin of a herbalist is a living record of his work, a porous parchment that absorbs the virtues of the plants it touches. I move toward the back of the hut, where the air is colder and smells of damp stone and fermenting fruit. Here, in the shadows, are the large ceramic crocks where the elderberry oxymel has been aging. It is a slow, viscous mixture of honey, vinegar, and the dark, ink-like juice of the berries. I lift the heavy lid and the scent hits me, a sharp, sour-sweet tang that makes the back of my throat tingle. It smells of the dying days of summer, of heavy clusters of purple berries sagging under their own weight in the hedgerows. I begin the process of straining the oxymel. This is a task that cannot be rushed, for the liquid is thick and moves with the agonizing slowness of cold lava. I pour it into a large linen bag suspended from a wooden frame. The sound is a heavy, wet thwack as the mass of berries and liquid hits the bottom of the cloth. And then the waiting begins. One drop at a time, the dark purple essence drips into the bowl below. Drip, pause. Drip, pause. I sit on my stool, my hands folded in my lap, and I watch the rhythm. It is the heartbeat of the morning. Each drop is a concentrated bead of history, the rain that fell in July, the sun that baked the leaves in August, the frost that finally broke the skins of the berries in October. My mind wanders to the elder tree itself, the old mother of the forest. It is a tree of contradictions, its flowers smelling of cream and honey, its berries of iron and earth. To take from the elder is to make a pact with the seasons, and I have always been careful to leave a portion for the birds and the soil. The silence of the mid-morning is different from the silence of the dawn. It is a busier silence, filled with the distant, muffled sounds of the village coming to life. I can hear the faint, rhythmic thwump of a flail on a threshing floor, the sound traveling through the earth and the foundations of my hut. I can hear the occasional lonely lowing of a cow, a sound of deep, bovine melancholy that echoes through the trees. These sounds do not disturb me. They are like the background noise of the forest itself, as natural as the wind or the creek. I reach for a bunch of dried elecampane roots that have been hanging near the chimney. They are gray and shaggy, smelling of bananas and camphor, a strange, exotic scent in this cold northern landscape. I begin to slice them thin, the knife making a crisp snick, snick, snick sound against the wooden board. Each slice reveals a star-shaped pattern in the center of the root, a hidden geometry of nature. These will be added to the elderberry syrup to create a tonic for the lungs, something to cut through the heavy dampness that settles in the chests of the elders when the mists turn to ice. The work is repetitive, almost mechanical, but it requires a constant, low-level focus. I must ensure the slices are uniform so they dry evenly. I must ensure the fire remains at a steady, pulsing glow. Not so hot that the syrup's scorched, not so cool that the infusion stalls. I am a conductor of temperatures, a guardian of the boiling point. I move to the mortar again, this time with a handful of dried rose petals and a few pods of star anise that I traded for at the last fair. The rose petals are brittle and paper-thin, their scent a ghost of a garden long gone. As I begin to grind them, the aroma rises in a soft, floral cloud, mixing with the sharp, licorice-like scent of the anise. It is an intoxicating mixture, a scent of the East brought to a mud-walled hut in the woods. I grind until it is a fine, fragrant dust, a powder that will be mixed with honey to soothe the throats of the singers in the parish church. My arm aches, a dull, familiar heat in the shoulder, but I do not stop. The rhythm of the grinding is too precious to break. It is a form of meditation, a way of emptying the mind of everything but the sensation of the stone and the smell of the roses. By now, the sun has moved far enough that it no longer shines through the window, leaving the hut in a dim, cool twilight once again. The iron pot is finally ready. I lift it from the crane, my muscles tensing against the weight, and carry it to the cooling stone. The steam that rises from it is now thick and herbal, carrying the scent of the hawthorn and the dandelion. I let it sit, watching the surface of the water as it slowly stills, becoming a dark, opaque mirror. I think about the life of a plant, the way it spends its entire existence in one spot, reaching down into the dark and up into the light. It is a life of absolute patience, of total surrender to the elements. And here I am, taking that life and transforming it, trying to catch a piece of that stability and give it to a person whose life is filled with chaos and pain. It is a heavy responsibility, though I rarely think of it in those terms. Mostly, I just think about the roots. The roots are honest. They do not lie about what they are. I take a moment to eat. My meal is as simple and unvarying as my work. A heel of dark, dense rye bread, a piece of hard cheese that tastes of salt and old grass, and a cup of the infusion I made this morning. The bread is tough, requiring a slow, deliberate chewing that echoes the grinding of my mortar. I sit by the window and watch a robin hop across the frozen mud outside. It is looking for something that isn't there, its movements sharp and jerky. We are both scavengers in our own way, looking for the small bits of life that can sustain us through the cold. I feel a deep sense of kinship with the bird, with the trees, with the very dirt itself. I have no desire for the world of the village, for the noise of the tavern, or the gossip of the marketplace. My world is here, within these four walls, among the jars and the bundles and the slow steaming pots. After I eat, I begin the long process of cleaning the jars that have been returned to me. This is perhaps the most tedious part of my day, yet I find a certain peace in it. I use hot water and a handful of coarse sand to scour the insides of the glass and ceramic. The sound a harsh grate, grate, grate that fills the room. I rinse them carefully, the water running clear and cold, and set them upside down on a clean linen cloth to dry. Each jar has its own history, a story of a sickness cured or a pain eased. I handle them with respect, for they are the vessels of my art. The light is beginning to fade again, the afternoon slipping away into the early evening. The air is growing colder, and I can feel the frost beginning to reclaim the world outside. I add more wood to the fire, the oak logs catching with a deep, resonant crackle. I reach for a large bundle of dried meadowsweet. The stems are long and stiff, the flowers a mass of dried, almond-scented fluff. I begin to strip the leaves and flowers from the stalks, the sound a soft hush, 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 like the sound of a distant sea. This is for the winter fever, the burning heat that takes hold of the body and refuses to let go. Meadowsweet is a gentle healer, a cooling breath in a fevered room. I pack it into a large ceramic jar, pressing it down with my hand until it is a solid, fragrant mass. My movements are slower now, the weight of the day beginning to settle in my limbs. I am not tired in the way a soldier is tired, or a blacksmith. My fatigue is a quiet, internal thing, a slow draining of energy that leaves me feeling hollow and transparent. I spend the final hour of the light organizing my seeds. I have dozens of small leather pouches, each containing the promise of next year's garden. I lay them out on the table, the seeds varying from tiny black specks of poppy to the large striped seeds of the hollyhock. I touch them, feeling their different textures, some smooth and oily, others rough and hairy. They are tiny capsules of time, holding within them the memory of the sun and the blueprints for the future. I check each pouch for dampness, for the tiny holes of weevils, for the scent of rot. Everything is in order. The seeds are sleeping, and so will I be soon. I gather them back into their box, the leather pouches clinking softly against each other. The sun has finally disappeared, and the forest is once again a wall of black. I light a single small candle made of beeswax, the flame a tiny golden spear in the gloom. It smells of honey and the summer, a sweet, lingering scent that softens the harshness of the winter evening. I sit in my chair and look around my home. The jars are filled, the bundles are organized, the fire is fed, the work of the day is done, and it was a good day. It was a day of stone and root, of fire and water, of silence and rhythm. I have done what was required of me, and the plants have done what was required of them. We are in balance. I watch the candle flame flicker in a draft, a tiny dancing spirit in the dark. My mind is quiet, my heart is steady. I am ready for the long, cold night. I am ready for the dreams of the forest. I am the herbalist, and I am at peace with the world of the small, the slow, and the hidden. The candle flame has burned down, its golden spear now a squat, trembling glow that casts long, spindly shadows of the hanging herbs against the timbered walls. The beeswax has pooled into a translucent lake at the base of the holder, smelling of the sun and the dust of 1,000 frantic wings. This is the hour of the deep cold, when the frost outside no longer just coats the world, but begins to bite into the very heart of the oak. I can hear the trees in the forest cracking, a sharp, sudden thwack, like a huntsman's bow snapping, as the sap inside them freezes and expands. It is a sound of great, silent violence. Yet here in my hut, everything remains held in a state of suspended animation. I move from my chair to the hearth one last time, my shadow stretching out before me like a dark, elongated giant. I am not looking for heat now, but for the closure of the day's fire. I take the iron shovel and begin to bank the embers, burying the glowing red hearts beneath a thick, insulating layer of white ash. This is an art of preservation. If I do it correctly, the fire will breathe slowly all through the night, a hidden ember waiting to be reborn at dawn. If I fail, the morning will be a bitter struggle against the damp and the dark. I find myself standing in the center of the room, my hands hanging heavy at my sides, listening to the house settle. A medieval hut is never truly still. The thatch above my head is a world of its own, a dry, golden landscape where mice move with the sound of rustling silk and the wind whispers through the reed ends like a choir of ghosts. I think of the hundreds of bundles of herbs above me, the yarrow, the tansy, the motherwort, and I imagine their spirits mingling in the dark. They are no longer growing, they are no longer green, but they possess a potency that the living plant can never match. They have been refined by the air and the shade. My mind drifts to the heavy, leather-bound book I keep hidden beneath the floorboards near the grain bin. It is not a book of magic, for magic is a fickle, dangerous thing. It is a book of observations. In it, I have recorded the dates of the first frost for 40 years, the height of the river in the spring, the exact day the first swallow returns to the eaves. It is a record of the world's heartbeat, a way of proving that even in the chaos of human life, the earth remains constant. I do not need to read it tonight. The information is etched into my very bones. I move toward the small, heavy door to check the bar. The iron is so cold, it feels as though it would peel the skin from my palms if I lingered too long. I slide the oak bolt into place, a deep, resonant thud that seals me in. Outside, the world is a predatory place of ice and hunger. But inside, I am the master of my own small kingdom of jars. I feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of the sheer weight of time. I am not the first herbalist to stand in this spot, and I will not be the last. The knowledge I carry is a torch passed through the dark, a collection of secrets whispered from one generation of calloused hands to the next. We are the ones who remember what the rest of the world has forgotten, that the cure for the bite is often found within 3 paces of the creature that bit you, that the root that grows in the shadow of the gallows has no power, but the leaf that grows in the spray of a waterfall is full of light. These are the truths that do not change, even as kings fall and cathedrals rise. I begin the slow process of preparing for sleep. I remove my heavy woolen tunic, the fabric stiff with the salt of my own sweat and the dust of the road. My skin feels the sudden sharp kiss of the night air, and I shiver, a long, rolling tremor that starts in my shoulders and ends in my heels. I wash my face in the last of the water in the basin, the liquid now skimmed with a thin, jagged pane of ice that I must break with my knuckles. The cold is a shock, a sudden clarity that sweeps away the cobwebs of the afternoon's labor. I dry myself on a rough linen cloth, the texture like sand against my skin. I am a man of the earth, and my body reflects it, gnarled, weathered, and marked by the seasons. I climb into my bed, a simple frame of rope and wood, topped with a mattress of straw and dried hops. The hops are a secret of the trade. Their scent is a heavy, soporific weight that pulls the mind down into the deep, dark furrows of sleep. As I settle into the straw, it crackles and sighs, 1,000 tiny voices welcoming me home. I pull the heavy sheepskin rugs up to my chin. They smell of lanolin, smoke, and old winters. I lie perfectly still, waiting for the warmth of my own body to create a small private climate beneath the covers. It takes time. The cold is persistent, reaching through the blankets with ghostly fingers. I focus on my breathing, slow, deep, and rhythmic. I imagine my breath as a golden thread winding its way out of my lungs, through the hut, and into the dark forest beyond. I see it weaving through the bare branches of the oaks, brushing over the fur of the sleeping foxes, dipping into the frozen surface of the brook. I am expanding, I am no longer confined to this bed, this hut, this skin. I am the frost on the stone. I am the owl's silent wing. I am the deep, slow pulse of the sleeping roots. In the darkness, my thoughts become images, vivid and wordless. I see the meadow where the meadowsweet grows, but it is not as it was in July. It is a field of silver fire, the flowers glowing with an internal light. I see the river, but its water is made of liquid starlight, flowing over stones that are actually giant uncut emeralds. These are the dreams of the herbs, the memories of the earth that I have absorbed through my skin. I feel a profound sense of gratitude to the sun for the growth, to the rain for the life, and to the dark for the rest. The worries of the village, the taxes, the tithes, the rumors of plague in the south, they are like distant thunder heard from the safety of a deep cave. They have no power here. In this hut, the only law is the law of the seasons, and the only judge is the frost. The silence has reached its zenith. Even the wood beetles have stopped their ticking. The world is held in a breathless, crystalline pause. I feel my consciousness beginning to fray at the edges, like an old piece of silk. The boundaries between me and the room are dissolving. The smell of the dried valerian is no longer a scent I perceive. It is a part of my own essence. I am sinking into the straw, into the floorboards, into the very bedrock of the world. I am becoming the silence. I am the long, slow exhalation of the medieval night. There is no tomorrow, only this eternal frozen now. I am the herbalist, and I am finally, utterly at rest. The dark is not a void. It is a presence, a heavy velvet cloak that covers me and the world, keeping us safe until the first bird dares to sing. I let go of the thread. I let go of the fire. I sink into the hops, into the sheepskin, into the earth. I am gone. But the sleep of an herbalist is never a total departure. It is a shallow, rhythmic drifting, a state where the senses remain tethered to the environment by 1,000 invisible hairs. Even in the deepest part of the night, when the moon has climbed to its highest, coldest peak, and the world outside is a silver-plated desert of ice, I am aware of the subtle shifts in the hut's constitution. I feel the way the air grows heavier as the humidity from the drying roots in the rafters begins to settle, a damp, herbal weight that presses down upon the room like a physical hand. I am aware, in a way that defies logic, of the exact moment the last ember in the banked hearth finally surrenders its glow, turning into a cold, gray flake of ash. The loss of that tiny heart of heat sends a shiver through the structure of the house, a minute contraction of the timber that I feel in my own ribs. I am suspended in this gray purgatory between being and non-being, a place where the memories of the day's labor turn into slow-moving shadows. I see the faces of those who came to my door last week, the weary eyes of the plowman, the gnarled hands of the weaver. But they are not people anymore. They are merely vessels for the ailments I treat. They are walking manifestations of the damp, the cold, and the weariness of the world. And I am the one who must balance the scales with nothing but bark, leaf, and seed. The middle of the night silence is suddenly broken by a sound that is both familiar and jarring. the crack of the ice on the pond nearby, a sound like a giant snapping a dry twig. It reverberates through the frozen earth, a tectonic shudder that travels up through the floorboards and into my bed frame. I do not startle, I simply absorb the vibration. It is the language of the winter, a reminder that the world is a living, struggling entity, even when it appears dead. My mind begins to wander back into the deep history of the forest that surrounds me. I think of the great oak, the one the villagers call the hanging tree, though it hasn't seen a rope in 100 years. I know its roots. I have dug near them for the black-stained earth that helps with the skin rot. I know that beneath the frozen surface, the life of the tree is pulled back into a tiny, dense core, a concentration of essence that is almost diamond hard. I try to mimic that concentration in my own mind, pulling my thoughts away from the scattered anxieties of the coming spring and focusing them into a single, sharp point of awareness. I am here. I am breathing. I am the witness to this specific, unrepeatable night. The scent of the hops in my mattress is now so pervasive that it feels as though my very blood has been replaced by their bitter, golden essence. It is a heavy, resinous smell that clouds the brain and slows the pulse until the world seems to move in slow motion. I find myself contemplating the nature of a tincture, the way the spirit leaches the life from the plant, capturing its soul in a liquid that never dies. I am like that spirit, I think. I am leeching the life from the forest, capturing its strength in my jars so that it can be used to bolster the fragile lives of my kin. Is it a theft or a transformation? I decide it is a conversation, a long, slow dialogue between the human and the wild. The forest gives its medicine, and in return, I give it my attention, my labor, and eventually, my bones. There is a deep, quiet comfort in this bargain. It removes the fear of the dark, the fear of the winter, even the fear of death itself. We are all just energy moving from one form to another, from the sun to the leaf, from the leaf to the vial, from the vial to the vein. A new sound enters the room, a sound so faint it is almost an imagination. The skitter-scratch of a field mouse that has found its way into my store of dried rose hips. I should get up and shoo it away, for those hips are precious. But I find that I cannot move. My limbs are made of lead. My fingers are made of stone. I watch in my mind's eye the tiny creature as it navigates the dark, its whiskers twitching, its heart beating 100 times for every one of mine. It is a tiny engine of life in a cold world, and I find that I cannot begrudge it a few seeds. Let it eat. Let it live. There is enough for both of us in this grand, slow-moving economy of the forest. The mouse's movement becomes a part of the night's rhythm, a tiny, percussive counterpoint to the long, low moaning of the wind in the chimney. I feel a strange, detached affection for the creature, a sense of fellowship that transcends the boundaries of species. In this hut, in this hour, we are both just small, warm things trying to survive the great, indifferent cold. The light begins to change, though it is still hours until dawn. The moon has moved to a position where its light can reach the narrow slit of my window, casting a single, sharp blade of silver across the floor. It illuminates the dust motes that are forever dancing in the air of an herbalist's home. tiny specks of mugwort, yarrow, and skin. They swirl in the moonlight like a miniature galaxy, a chaotic yet beautiful dance of the discarded. I watch them, mesmerized, as they rise and fall on the invisible currents created by my own breathing. Each speck is a memory of a plant I have touched, a record of a moment spent in the woods. I realize that I am never truly alone. I am surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 summers, the pulverized remains of 1,000,000 leaves. They are my companions in the dark, a silent audience that keeps watch while I sleep. My thoughts drift to the concept of the signature of plants, the old belief that every herb bears a physical mark that reveals its purpose. The lung-shaped leaf of the lungwort, the heart-shaped seed of the shepherd's purse, the bright eye-like center of the daisy. I wonder if I, too, have a signature. If someone were to look at me, would they see the curve of the sickle in my spine? Would they see the texture of the bark in my skin? I believe they would. I am becoming the things I tend. I am becoming the forest, one day at a time, one root at a time. And this realization brings me a sense of absolute, unshakable peace. I do not need to be a man of the world. I am a man of the earth, and the earth is a vast, generous, and patient master. I feel the last of my conscious thoughts beginning to dissolve, turning into the same gray mist that is currently swallowing the trees outside. The silver blade of moonlight has moved across the floor, leaving me in the velvet dark once again. The transition to the deepest sleep is like descending a staircase of moss into a warm underground cavern. The air is thick with the smell of the earth's own breath, damp, mineral, and ancient. I am no longer thinking, I am only feeling. I feel the weight of the blankets as a protective layer of soil. I feel the rhythm of my heart as the slow tectonic shift of the hills. I am part of the long, gray dream of the medieval winter, a dream that has no beginning and no end. The hut, the forest, the village, the king, they are all just ripples on the surface of a deep, dark lake. I am sinking to the bottom, where the water is still and the pressure is constant. I am the herbalist, and I am the herb. I am the healer, and I am the wound. I am the silence, and I am the sound of the wind. I let go of the last thread of the waking world, and I fall, softly and without fear, into the infinite, healing embrace of the dreamless dark. The transition from the deep abyss of night into the first ghost-like pre-dawn is a process of agonizing slowness, a creeping return of the physical world that begins not with light, but with a shift in the quality of the cold. It is a transition that I feel first in the marrow of my bones, a subtle tightening of the frame as the dampness of the thawing frost begins to pull the heat from the very center of my chest. I lie perfectly still, my eyes still closed, but my internal map is already awakening. I can sense the weight of the ceramic jars on the eastern wall, cold and impassive. Their contents, the dried flowers, the ground roots, the infused oils, still locked in their winter slumber. The air in the hut has become a stagnant pool, a heavy sediment of wood smoke and the sharp, lingering ghost of valerian. I find myself focusing on the rhythmic sound of a single drop of condensation that is formed on the underside of a copper kettle hanging near the hearth. It gathers its weight with an unbearable patience, a liquid bead growing larger and heavier until gravity finally claims it, and it falls into the cold ash with a tiny, muffled shuck. In the absolute silence of the hour, that sound is as significant as a thunderclap. It is the first movement of the day, the first sign that the stasis of the night is beginning to fracture. I do not open my eyes yet, for the darkness is a comfort that I am loath to surrender. In this blind state, I can feel the forest outside more clearly than if I were standing in its midst. I sense the ancient yews, their needles heavy with rime, standing like dark, silent sentinels in the mist. I feel the slow, lethargic stirrings of the brook, its water moving beneath the lid of ice, a secret current that carries the memory of the mountains down to the sleeping meadows. My mind drifts to the roots of the world, the vast, interconnected web of mycelium and wood that binds the trees together in a silent, subterranean council. I am a part of that council, a lowly observer who has spent a lifetime learning the subtle shifts in the earth's temperament. I think of the seeds I have stored in my leather pouches. I can almost hear them dreaming, a low, buzzing potential that is waiting for the precise moment when the sun's angle shifts by a fraction of a degree. Life is not a sudden explosion. It is a persistent, relentless pressure, a slow-motion push against the cold. And I am the one who measures that pressure, one day at a time. Eventually, the necessity of the body overrides the luxury of the dream. I feel the stiffness in my hands, the way the skin of my knuckles feels tight and brittle, like the bark of a drought-stricken elm. I pull my arms out from beneath the sheepskin, and the shock of the air is a sharp, biting reprimand. It is a cold that doesn't just sit on the skin. It searches for the joints, looking for the weaknesses where the years of damp and labor have left their mark. I sit up, the movement causing the straw of my mattress to erupt in a cacophony of dry, rasping complaints. Each rustle sounds like a secret being told in a language of friction and dust. I sit on the edge of the bed for a long time, my feet hovering just above the floorboards, waiting for my spirit to fully re-inhabit the flesh. The room is a study in varying shades of gray, the charcoal gray of the hearth, the silver gray of the frost on the window, the leaden gray of the jars. There is no color, yet color is a gift of the sun, and the sun is still a distant, theoretical possibility hidden behind the curve of the world. I find my boots by touch, the leather cold and as stiff as iron. My fingers fumble with the laces, the task taking twice as long as it should because the cold has robbed my tips of their precision. This is the daily humbling of the herbalist, the reminder that despite my knowledge of the great cycles of nature, I am a creature of fragile, shivering meat. I stand, and the floorboards groan beneath my weight, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates up through my shins. I move to the hearth, my footsteps making a soft scuff through the layer of fallen leaves and dried debris that I have neglected to sweep. I take the iron poker and gently disturb the bank of white ash. Beneath the pale shroud, the ember still lives. It is a tiny, pulsing eye of orange, a stubborn survivor of the long night. I feel a surge of irrational affection for that little spark. It is the heart of my home, the source of my comfort, the small sun that keeps the darkness at bay. I feed it carefully, a few dry shavings of cedar, then a handful of pine needles that flare up with a sudden brilliant crackle, and a scent that is like a sharp, resinous slap to the senses. The smell of the burning pine is the true beginning of the day. It cuts through the stagnant, dusty air of the hut, bringing with it a sense of movement and purpose. I watch the smoke rise, a thin blue-gray ribbon that twists and turns as it seeks the chimney. I move to the window and scrape a small circle into the frost with the side of my thumb. The ice is thick, a crystalline forest of its own, but it yields to the heat of my body. Through the small, clear portal, I see the world outside. The mist is a solid wall of white, clinging to the trunks of the oaks and blurring the outlines of the shed. There is no wind, no movement, no sound. The world is held in a state of absolute, terrifying purity. It is as if the universe has been wiped clean, and I am the only thing left to witness the blank canvas. I stand there for a long time, my breath fogging the glass, watching the nothingness. There is a profound peace in this void, a sense that for this one moment there are no expectations, no sicknesses to cure, no duties to perform. I am just a man standing in a hut, watching the mist, but the water in the bucket is frozen solid, and the iron pot is waiting. I take the heavy mallet and break the ice in the pail, the shards flying like diamonds in the dim light. The water beneath is dark and viscous, smelling of the deep earth and the iron of the well. I fill the pot and hang it on the crane, the chain clinking with a cold, metallic music. As I wait for the water to heat, I begin the first labor of the day, the sorting of the bone set and the gravel root. These are rough, unglamorous plants, their stems thick and hairy, their virtues hidden behind a facade of ugliness. I work by the light of the fire, my hands moving in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Separate the leaves from the stalks, discard the blackened bits, gather the good material into a clean wooden bowl. Snip, wrestle, drop. Snip, rustle, drop. The sound becomes a mantra, a way of anchoring myself in the present. My mind doesn't wander to the village or the future. It stays right here, at the tip of my shears, in the texture of the dried leaf. The water begins to whisper, the stage just before the simmer, where tiny bubbles begin to form on the bottom of the pot and rise to the surface with a soft, hissing sound. I take a handful of the dried peppermint and toss it in. The transformation is instantaneous. The steam, which had been scentless and damp, suddenly becomes a vibrant green cloud of aroma that clears the head and brightens the spirit. I lean over the pot, letting the mint-infused vapor wash over my face, feeling my pores open and my senses sharpen. This is the herbalist's breakfast, a meal of scent and heat. I feel the last of the night's lethargy evaporating, replaced by a steady, quiet energy that is the hallmark of the morning labor. I am no longer a shivering ghost in a dark hut. I am a craftsman at his bench, a weaver of remedies, a part of the slow, grinding machinery of the world. I look at my hands, the stained skin, the broken nails, the deep lines that hold the dust of 1,000 plants. They are ugly hands by the standards of the town, but they are honest. They have never held a sword or a scepter. They have only held the earth and the things that grow from it. I feel a deep, resonant pride in that fact. In a world of fleeting power and hollow promises, the work of the herbalist is real. It is as real as the stone and the fire and the bitter cold of the morning. I take a wooden spoon and stir the peppermint tea, the dark leaves swirling in the hot water like a miniature storm. I am ready for the light now. I am ready for the first bird to sing, for the mist to lift, for the first knock on the door. I am ready to be the bridge once again. I am the herbalist, the keeper of the slow knowledge, the master of the quiet hours. And as the first thin line of gray begins to define the horizon, I realize that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The cycle continues, the world turns, and the herbs remain.